The hum of my laptop filled the apartment as I leaned back in my velvet chair, sipping lukewarm coffee. My silk blouse felt almost too heavy for the late October morning, but I didn't mind. There was something comforting in these little luxuries I'd earned myself. The city skyline stretched beyond the window, a mosaic of golden leaves and concrete towers. Then my phone buzzed on the marble countertop. A text from my mom. "Sophie, your dad wants to see you this weekend. Family dinner. Don't disappoint." I swallowed, feeling a flicker of irritation. Family dinners were code for judgment disguised as conversation. For years, I dodged these moments, quietly building a life they couldn't see, or perhaps wouldn't understand. A memory pierced me. The Christmas when I was 16, standing in the living room, watching my brother's mountain of gifts while my parents whispered about how we couldn't afford presents for my kids that year. I'd smiled through it, masking the sting in my chest. Now, years later, I was supposed to go back. To show up. To pretend the past didn't matter. My fingers hovered over the screen. Part of me wanted to reply, maybe next year, but another part, the stubborn one, knew I had to face this. And maybe, just maybe, it was time they saw everything I had become. I was 15, standing in the tiny living room of our old suburban house, watching my younger brother, Ethan, tear through wrapping paper with reckless joy. The smell of pine and cinnamon lingered from the cheap tree Dad had insisted on buying, and the sound of laughter echoed like a cruel reminder of what I didn't have. "We couldn't afford presents for your kids this year," Dad said to Mom, his voice almost casual, like it wasn't supposed to sting. I felt a hollow pit form in my stomach. My brother didn't notice, of course. He never did. He had this effortless charm that made him shine even in the shadows of our struggles. And I just stood there, pretending it didn't matter that my carefully folded wish lists and homemade gifts meant nothing in comparison. My hands trembled as I gripped a small, hand-painted ornament I'd made for Mom and Dad. I had stayed up all night crafting it, hoping it would at least earn a smile. But Dad barely glanced at it. Ethan's pile of toys towered over me, a silent accusation. I wasn't enough. That night, I retreated to my bedroom and pulled out the gift my grandmother had given me months earlier, a delicate locket with a tiny engraving. "Strength isn't about what you have. It's about what you build yourself." I pressed it to my chest and let the tears come, shaking with quiet rage and sorrow. I knew then I couldn't rely on anyone else to validate me or my efforts. The sting of being dismissed, of being overlooked in favor of my brother, became fuel. I promised myself I would find a way out, away from judgment, away from comparison, away from the helplessness that defined our home. I didn't yet know how. But that locket became my talisman, a quiet reminder that one day, the girl who stood in that shadowed living room would grow into someone they couldn't ignore. Someone who would prove, not with words, but with everything she built, that her worth was never tied to what they could or couldn't give. And from that night onward, I began quietly planning my escape, not from my family, not entirely, but from the limitations they had tried to define for me. After high school, I left our small town with nothing but a suitcase, my grandmother's locket tucked safely under my blouse, and a head full of stubborn determination. College was the first step, a scholarship in a city I had only ever visited in dreams. Every lecture, every late-night assignment, every coffee-fueled exam was a reminder. I was building something no one could take away. I met people who saw potential where my family never had. One of them, Professor Lillian Hayes, became my mentor, a sharp, elegant woman who had clawed her way up the corporate ladder when the odds were stacked against her. "Don't let anyone define your worth," she said one afternoon, sliding a folder across her oak desk. "Here's an internship. Make it yours." I didn't just take it, I devoured it. The first months were brutal. I spent nights poring over spreadsheets, teaching myself coding, pitching ideas to clients who didn't want to see a young woman at the table. I cried quietly in my tiny apartment more than once, exhausted and frustrated. But each small victory, the first client I secured, the first profitable campaign I managed, the first recognition in a professional newsletter, felt like a secret triumph, a silent message to the little girl who had stood in that Christmas-lit living room years ago. I kept my success hidden from my family. My social media was modest, my phone conversations carefully measured. I didn't want envy or judgment, just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I could rise on my own terms. And rise I did. Within a few years, I had a small consulting firm specializing in digital marketing. It wasn't flashy, but it was mine. Every contract, every employee I mentored, every project I delivered was proof of what I had built from scratch. Through it all, the locket remained around my neck, a reminder that strength wasn't about what I had. It was about what I could create with patience, talent, and resilience. I sometimes imagine Dad and Ethan seeing me now, but I didn't crave their approval anymore. My focus was my life, my growth, my independence. And yet, a part of me knew that one day, the past would demand to meet the present. That the memory of those years of comparison, rejection, and quiet hurt would collide with the woman I had become. I just didn't know how soon that day would come, or how dramatic it would be. The city skyline outside my office windows stretched endlessly, golden light reflecting off glass towers. And for the first time in years, I felt a thrill of anticipation. I was ready. The day finally arrived. I had agreed to the family dinner, partly out of curiosity, partly because I was ready to close a chapter I'd carried for too long. As I parked my car outside the familiar suburban house, memories of Christmas mornings and whispered comparisons crawled back, but this time, they didn't sting. I had armor now, not the kind that shields, but the kind that empowers. The door swung open before I could knock. Dad's eyes widened. Ethan's mouth opened in a half-smile, half-smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Sophie," Dad said, almost nervously. "You look good." "Thank you," I said softly, stepping inside. My heels clicked on the polished hardwood floor, and I took a deliberate pause, letting them notice the subtle changes. The designer coat I wore, the delicate gold jewelry, the faint aroma of a perfume I'd bought for myself after my first big promotion. The living room was the same, yet I saw it differently now. The peeling wallpaper, the tired couch, the family photos in mismatched frames. It all felt smaller somehow. I smiled inwardly. In comparison to my life now, these old rooms held echoes, not power. Dinner started, polite and strained. Conversation fluttered around sports, weather, and distant cousins. I let them talk, let them bask in the illusion that I was still the same Sophie, the one who had silently endured and disappeared into shadows. Then, as dessert plates were cleared, I finally spoke. "You know, I've been thinking about that Christmas, when Dad said we couldn't afford presents for my kids." I let the words hang. Ethan frowned, and Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I watched, I listened, and I remembered. "And I want you to see something now." I reached into my bag and placed a sleek tablet on the table. The screen lit up with images of my company's office, employees, projects, and awards. Numbers flashed, revenue, contracts, client testimonials. I watched their faces as disbelief registered. "This is my company," I said. I started it with nothing but a locket, some stubborn determination, and the refusal to let anyone else define my worth. I don't just work. I own my success. And no, it wasn't easy, but I did it. Ethan's jaw dropped. Dad's face paled. Silence filled the room, heavy with guilt, envy, and astonishment. The brother who had always received praise and gifts now had no words, just stunned eyes. Dad's lips quivered as he tried to form a sentence, but I held up a hand. "You don't need to say anything. Just see it, understand it. I built this life, and it's mine." The weight of years of comparison, of whispered judgments and dismissed efforts, seemed to lift as I spoke. I wasn't the overlooked daughter anymore. I was a woman who had faced every shadow of doubt and turned it into light, and now they had no choice but to acknowledge it. For the first time in years, I saw them, not as authority figures or critics, but as people who had underestimated me, just as the little girl in that living room had feared. And I realized something profound. The power wasn't in proving them wrong. The power was in showing myself what I was capable of. The silence lingered for a moment longer, thick and heavy, until I finally spoke again. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I came here because I've realized something important. I can forgive, I can help, but on my terms." Dad swallowed hard, shifting in his chair. Ethan's frown deepened. I looked at them both, letting my gaze settle, deliberate. Years of comparisons, of judgments, of saying what we couldn't afford, those are over. If we move forward, it has to be different. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Then I laid out the rules. "Dad, I want you to take your retirement seriously. You've spent years worrying about appearances and what people think. Start investing in what makes you happy, whether it's travel, volunteering, or even learning something new. But you must stop using money as a weapon or a measure of love. Gifts are never about price. They're about thought, effort, and presence." Ethan shifted, clearly expecting a scolding. I smiled slightly, but my eyes were steady. "Ethan, you have incredible potential, but you've been coasting on charm and family favoritism for too long. You need to take responsibility for your own life. Find your passion, work hard, and stop relying on luck or comparisons to make you feel worthy." I reached for my locket, letting it rest in my hand for emphasis. "And all of you, this family, needs to understand that love isn't transactional. It's about respect, empathy, and growth. I care about you. I want us to move forward, but only if we truly try to change." There was a shift in the room. Dad looked down, eyes misty, while Ethan's jaw tightened. They were processing, maybe even questioning the patterns they had unconsciously clung to for decades. "I'm willing to help," I said softly, "but it won't be me bending to old dynamics. I'll support you financially if needed, yes, but only if you commit to real growth. No excuses, no past behaviors. This is your chance to do better for yourselves, for your families, and for each other." For the first time, I felt the full weight of control in my hands. Not cruel control, but empowered guidance. I wasn't exacting revenge. I was steering them toward accountability and healing, while claiming my space and respect. And in that moment, I realized something else. The power I had amassed wasn't just financial. It was emotional. I had survived being overlooked, dismissed, and undervalued. And now I was giving back, but on my terms, with clarity and compassion. As I set down the locket on the table, a quiet calm settled over all of us. The past hadn't disappeared, but the future now belonged to the choices we were willing to make. And I knew, finally, that I had the strength not just to face the past, but to shape what came next. The weeks that followed were quietly transformative. Dad started taking cooking classes he'd always joked about trying, but never pursued. On weekends, he volunteered at a local community center, finding a satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. Watching him laugh over a burnt loaf of bread or a clumsy attempt at painting made me realize how little he had truly experienced outside of our home's old expectations. Ethan, too, began to change, though more reluctantly at first. He enrolled in a design course, pouring energy into work that felt meaningful rather than performed for approval. He still stumbled and complained, but he also began to take pride in his own efforts. Slowly, the brother who had once seemed so effortlessly favored began to understand the weight of accomplishment earned, not handed. As for me, I returned to my apartment one evening, slipping off my coat and touching the locket that had been my silent companion through every trial. It gleamed softly under the warm light, and I held it for a long moment, thinking of the girl who had once stood in a living room surrounded by gifts she didn't receive, feeling invisible. I realized that journey had shaped every fiber of who I had become. I had learned that strength wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about proving yourself right. It was about taking the pain, the comparison, the sting of being dismissed, and transforming it into something powerful, resilient, and unshakable. I glanced at the skyline from my window. The city lights twinkled like 1,000 possibilities, and I smiled, softly, with a calm certainty. The past no longer dictated my value. The people I loved had the chance to change, to grow, and to truly see me, Not the girl they thought they knew, but the woman I had become. The locket lay in my palm as I whispered to myself, a quiet mantra. Strength is what I built, and it is mine alone. That night, I slept peacefully, knowing that the echoes of old wounds had finally met the harmony of self-respect. I had faced the shadows of my family, and I had emerged not just victorious, but free. And for the first time in my life, I realized, no gift under a tree, no approval whispered in passing, could ever compare to the gift I had given myself: independence, confidence, and the unshakable knowledge that I was enough.